Good afternoon. Can we ask you to please take your seats and try to come closer? We don't bite. So we give them some time to come closer. So this is such a beautiful auditorium, and it's being renovated so pretty. I love to be here. Well, I'll start by giving you welcome to the Global Connection series. It's a series of talks that we try to connect Catholic University with global people. So by global people, we mean people who are related to the embassies here in the district that are representing their countries here in the United States. So today I have the pleasure to introduce to you the Ambassador of Portugal to the United States, Dr. Francisco Antônio Duarte Lopes. I'll just tell you that I am from Brazil, so I do speak Portuguese. So that's why I can say his name with my Brazilian accent. So Ambassador Lopes is a career diplomat. He has served as permanent representative of Portugal to the United Nations since 2017, before coming here. So prior to his appointment, he was also the representative of Portugal to the United Nations. Ambassador Duarte served at Portugal's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Lisbon, where he was promoted to the rank of the ambassador in December 2015. He had previously assumed the rank of political director in July 2014. He was Director General of European Affairs from January 2012 and Chief of Staff to the Secretary of State for European Affairs from June 2011 to January 2012. He was born in Castelo Branco, Portugal. Ambassador Duarte Lopes holds a law degree from the Faculdade de Direito de Lisboa, so it's the University of Lisbon. He began his professional service as an attaché in the Foreign Minister's Consular Service section in 1989, before being posted to Pakistan in 1993 to 1995. So Ambassador Francisco Antônio Lopes has been here serving as ambassador since April 1st, 2022. So he's been here for exactly 1 year. And today we had the pleasure of having him visiting us at the Oliveira Lima Library. If you don't know about the Oliveira Lima Library, please Google. The Oliveira Lima Library is the largest collection that tells the story of Brazil that is outside Brazil. So it's a precious collection. Oliveira Lima was Portuguese, Brazilian, and we had the great pleasure to have the ambassador's wife with us as well. And it's been a great great afternoon already. So without further ado, thank you, Ambassador Lopes, for coming, and please tell us a little bit more about sustainability. I'm going to sit there, and then I'm going to join you here, unless you want to speak from here, but you can have the podium if you like. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here today in this lovely auditorium, by the way, and in this university. And thank you very much, Professor Duília de Melo, not only for your introduction, but especially for the incredibly interesting visit we just had to the Oliveira Lima Library. As you said, it's incredibly big, incredibly rich, incredibly diverse collection of books and artifacts by a Brazilian diplomat, a Brazilian career diplomat that died 100 years ago, and donated the library, himself and his wife, to this university where he taught international law. And he has a special connection to Portugal because he lived a part of his youth in Portugal, and he was collecting mostly books about Brazil, but also books about Portugal and the Portuguese language. So there is this Luso-Brazilian, Portuguese-Brazilian dimension of this incredibly library, of this treasure that you have here at the Catholic University of America. So thank you very much for this visit this afternoon prior to this talk. So again, a pleasure to be here. I'll try to be brief, and I'm mostly here to reply to your questions, to listen to your comments, to discuss ideas if you want. Not only about sustainability and innovation, I will mostly speak about sustainability in my prior intervention, but if you want to comment or question about any other dimension of the foreign relations of Portugal or any other thing connected to Portugal, please do it. Feel free to do it. This will certainly enrich also our afternoon and especially my afternoon. So 2 or 3 notes before we start the interactive part of this session. You have certainly seen at least some news about it. The most recent report from the United Nations on climate change. And it's very clear, year after year, decade after decade, that the state of our planet, it's not getting better. And it's more and more obvious that there are different causes for this dire state of our planet, but one of the causes is our actions, our actions as human beings. And if we don't accelerate our action, and all together, because this is of course a common challenge to all of us and all the countries in the world, if we don't accelerate our action, we will be in trouble, and we will be in trouble soon. Just to give you, and I mean globally, just to give you 3 clear indications of where we are today. The fact is that in 2023, or in 2022, if we want to speak about the last year that has already concluded, in 2022, the emissions, the carbon emissions were still going up, regardless of all the talk, all the promises, all the commitments that all of our countries have been declaring for some decades already. So carbon emissions were still going up. The use of fossil fuel was still going up. And the use of single-use plastic was still going up. Just 3 clear indications of the trend, of the tendency. So we are all starting to be more and more aware of this common threat and this huge challenge, but we are not doing enough because regardless of our commitments, these 3 indicators are still going up when they were already supposed to be decreasing. Now, what is a country like Portugal? Small-sized country, if you compare with the United States, of course. A medium-sized country, let's say, if you look at the almost 200 countries in the world, what are we doing in Portugal regarding this big challenge? Let me start with carbon emissions. In Portugal, we reached the peak of our carbon emissions in 2005 already, so almost 20 years ago. Since then, we have been decreasing. And it's important to know that there are some strategic bets that have been maintained by every government in Portugal, regardless of the political color of the governments that have been elected since 20, 25 years ago. One of them is clearly energy transition, and especially the bet on renewable energy. The second is the bet on a strategic bet also on blue economy. The third is on research and innovation, and the fourth is on digital transition, especially on e-government. A word on innovation before I get back to sustainability and to renewables especially. To make sure that we were working with the best centers of innovation and research in the world, we started 15 years ago some partnerships with American universities and American centers of research that have been renewed since then in series of 5 years. And the result from this there's an American connection to this bet on innovation and research. And the result is today very clear. I've been, since I arrived in Washington, as Professor de Mel said 1 year ago, I've been visiting these different partnerships between Portugal and American universities. And I think the results are not only clear, but very good. In Portugal, in the last 5-6 years, the transformation from pure science into applications, economic applications, has resulted in several startups, of course, as it is happening around the world, fortunately, but also in 7 companies that went from startups to what we normally call unicorns. And from these 7 unicorns based in Portugal, 3 of them are connected with, 4 of them, 4 of the 7 are connected with these partnerships, with these programs that we started 15 years ago with American universities. And they are clearly benefiting both countries and both economies, because some of them maintain their headquarters in Portugal, but others moved their headquarters to the US, but still having manpower, recruiting people, creating jobs both in Portugal and here in the US. So coming back to an energy transition, as I said, so 2005 was the peak of our emissions. We have been reducing, and I mean, to tell you the truth, this was a policy choice that right at the beginning was met with some doubts by part of our population, by us, Portuguese citizens. And why? Because right at the beginning we had to pay a bit more for our electricity, for example, because by then producing electricity from renewable energies was a bit more expensive than from fossil fuels. So it was not a widely consensual received or well-received policy choice. Bit by bit, year by year, decade after decade, I think that people in general realized that it was the right bet. Not only because the emissions have actually decreased, but also because nowadays, and especially after the start of the war last year, and it was clearly the moment when this became very obvious, the price of the electricity in Portugal and in Spain, we have now an integrated electricity market with our immediate neighbor, with Spain. The price of electricity came down, and it was, and especially more important than coming down, was cheaper than in other places of Europe, for example, that were not that much depending on renewable energy. So this choice on renewables made possible that nowadays 60% of our electricity comes from renewables, mainly from wind, hydro, solar, and biomass. 60% of the electricity, not of the total energy we consume, but 60% of electricity. And our plan, we are quite confident that we will reach more than 80% in 2025, and at the end of the decade we will be closer to 100% of electricity. Another thing we did already was to get rid of coal. 3 years ago we got rid of coal. We no longer use coal to produce electricity in Portugal. And as we don't have oil, or at least we are not producing oil, and we are not producing gas, for the rest of our energy needs, we of course continue. There's a continuous need to import energy. And we have started, we were actually the first country in Europe to import LNG, liquefied natural gas, from the US already in 2015. And again, because of this situation of war in Ukraine, it was a decision that made possible that we were not as dependent as other European countries from the import of energy, especially gas, from Russia when the war started last year. So 60% of our electricity is coming from renewables, and we are aiming at close to 100 as soon as possible, and not that further away. But of course, there's a lot that remains to do regarding the other energy needs in agriculture, in transportation, in housing, of course, in heating, for example. So we are still importing a lot of energy, including oil and gas, but our dependency from abroad in terms of energy in 15 years came down from 90%. So we were depending on 90% of our energy, we were depending on imports. In 15 years, this percentage came down to 65%. So we are more and more, we are relying more and more in energy that we produce ourselves, and this is all renewable energy. We are, of course, this is the story of our energy transition so far. We are, of course, a very small emitter of a very small polluter in global terms, and of course we have to deal with the challenges of energy transition together, because climate change is a global challenge. It's one of the obvious things, challenges / threats, let's put it like that it's clearly global, like terrorism, like loss of biodiversity, like migration. There are some questions that we have to deal with together. If we don't deal together with these global challenges, we will never be successful. With all the fragilities that the international system has in itself, we don't have the luxury to not try to deal together with these challenges. I'll leave it here. This was only the introduction, and I'm ready to reply to your difficult questions, Professor de Mello. But as I said in the beginning, any question regarding with this theme, but also with other themes connected with my country, I'll be very pleased to continue to talk with you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for setting the stage. We're now opening the Q&A. So if anybody has a question already, please start thinking about it and raise your hand whenever you have questions. We expect many questions from the students, but not only. So I will actually start by asking you a question that I think it's a little bit more like provocative. And it has to do with policies. So when we talk policies, and we talk in Portugal, we're talking Portuguese policies. How is it that we can do more by having it European Union policies regarding sustainability?
it's working. You know why I said that your questions would be difficult. Yes, I mean, for us, it's clear. I'm very glad, actually, that you brought the European Union into this talk, because for us, the European Union dimension, the European dimension in general, but the European Union dimension in particular is essential. We are members of the European Union, as we are founding members of NATO. So, I mean, this is clearly one basis, one pillar of our foreign policy. And to give you an idea, because I mean, most of you are not coming from European Union countries. To give you an idea, the integration today inside the European Union came to such levels that more than 50% of the laws that we have to abide ourselves, Portuguese citizens, Portuguese enterprises, Portuguese universities, more than 50% is decided in Brussels. So our parliament and our government are deciding less than 50% of the laws and regulations that we have to abide to in Portugal or in any other of the European Union countries. So this dimension, the European Union dimension, is clearly essential. And in this question of sustainability, we are very pleased to see that the European Union has been setting standards for such a long time. Actually, I didn't tell you about this in my initial intervention, but I have here, this is our net carbon zero plan. We were one of the first countries in the world to commit with net zero carbon by 2050. We have now advanced to 2045. I hope we can make it. And now the European Union itself, so the whole Union has committed with a carbon zero objective in 2050 and has actually advanced also a little bit. But this is done not only together, the 27 members of the European Union, but in true solidarity. And why do I say this? Because some of the countries of the European Union that are not so advanced in the energy transition, in using renewable energies, they will be allowed to emit more carbon a bit longer, but the whole of the European Union has now committed with this net zero objective. So we have to be together. We have to be working in solidarity to make sure that if in a specific area one country is more advanced, it will compensate for the other country that is not as advanced in this area, and then the other way around in other different areas.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have a question over there. Yes, please. I think Josh has a microphone for you.
Your Excellency, thank you for your presentation. Could you say something, please, about sustainability and innovation in Portuguese wine production?
In Portuguese?
Wine production.
Madeira.
Thank you. Although I'm a son of a farmer, I'm not really a specialist in wines. Probably because my father was not producing wine himself. But yes, we are now, we are a very old wine producing country, as you know. And although not a very big country, we are very diverse, and we are very proud of the diversity of our wines. In different regions, you can find completely different wines red or white, fortified wines like the famous Port and Madeira, and completely different varieties of wine. I'm old enough to remember that there was a tendency, like 35 years ago, to get our production that was seen as too local in small units and to turn this in a more industrial or industrial-like production with bigger farms, bigger companies, laborers producing much more, much bigger volumes, and the kind of wines that were not different from each other. Fortunately, this tendency didn't last long. The specialists quickly came to the conclusion that a country like Portugal, with such a big diversity of terroirs, of land, with such a big diversity of grape varieties, should precisely make the contrary bet. And that was to bet on the identity, the special characteristics on each and every wine region. And that's what it did. That's what we did, and that's what we have been doing for quite some time. And with this tendency to protect and invest on variety came also a bet on sustainability. Because what you are seeing now is more and more producers that are creating their wines in a way that is as much as possible close to the way that their grandparents or great-grandparents were producing, and not in line with the way that probably their parents were trying to produce when this tendency to more volumes and less diversity was chosen some time ago. So yes, we are betting on sustainability, and actually last week I visited a wine tasting event of Portuguese producers here in Washington, and they were precisely telling me about a national plan for sustainability, including for net zero carbon in 2050, and if possible sooner than 2050.
Okay, one more question right there.
Hi.
Keep the microphone.
Okay. Thank you for having us. My name is Tigist. I'm from the School of Architecture and Planning. You mentioned that Portugal was able to use 60% of renewable energy. I wanted to know what are some of the challenges that you faced, and how was the journey like? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the journey, I said, I gave you already a clue in my introduction, saying that the population in general, I mean, us, Portuguese citizens, had some doubts right at the beginning, because of course nobody wants to pay 1 cent more for his or her electricity. But there are other kind of challenges, some of them very, very technical, like for example the adaptation of the grids. As some of you clearly know, our grids, our traditional electricity grids are not ready to receive, or were not ready to receive renewable energy, especially because renewable energy is less stable entering the grid than the energy coming, for example, from coal, from oil, from gas, and other more traditional sources. So there was a lot of work right at the beginning in how to adapt the grid to more renewable sources. And actually, and of course you always learn by doing, at a certain moment, our national companies, electrical companies, were in a very good position, a very good and very competitive position in the world market regarding the way to adapt the electrical grids to more renewable energy, more renewable sources producing electricity. Because of that, because we learned by doing and by failing sometimes. But I have to say, and proudly, that through this process, and it's already a process of 25, 30 years, I don't remember a lack of electricity, so that electricity once failed because of this. In Portugal, it's very rare that the electricity is not working. It happened, I mean, in the last 25, 30 years, I remember twice because of storms, as it happens in any places in the world, for short moments, but I don't remember any shortage or any cut in electricity because of this transition. So, as I said, we certainly failed somewhere here and there, and we were learning. But I mean, we did it in a way that the consumers didn't notice these technical problems or these technical adaptations. Another question that was seen as clearly a handicap for renewables, especially for wind and solar, is the fact that you have more electricity coming from windmills when the wind is flowing strongly, and you have more electricity coming from solar plants when the sun, during the day, during daylight. And also there, we try to innovate. And some years ago, we, for example, created a system. I think it was probably not the first, I don't know. I think could be the first, but it was clearly one of the first in the world, where we are combining wind and hydro. So you get energy from hydro, from a dam, when the water from the dam is flowing down, and then during the night you use the wind power to bring the water up again to the dam. That will then be used the next day to produce electricity from the dam. I mean, to deal precisely with this different intensity of wind and solar during daylight or during the night, and in the case of wind, when the wind flows stronger or less strongly. Nowadays, there's another way of using wind and solar energy that doesn't go directly to the consumers, and we are now starting precisely doing that, looking at hydrogen, and in this case, it's not for electricity, it's not to produce electricity, it's to think about the rest of the energy needs, transportation, heating, and so on and so forth, where we will very soon start to use hydrogen. In our case, green hydrogen. Why green hydrogen? Because it comes from renewables.
Okay, so Grace?
Hi, thank you so much. My name's Grace. I'm a PhD student here in environmental engineering, and I just had a question about your coastline. I've never been to Portugal yet. I hope to soon. But I'm wondering how global trends of sea level rise will affect you guys, and if you're doing any mitigation strategies to combat that. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, because it gives me the opportunity to speak also about the ocean and its connection with energy. But starting with sea level rise, yes, we are already feeling that. We already lost, I don't know the figure by heart, but we lost some football fields, and it could be football or soccer, because the field is basically the same, of the same dimension. We lost like 90 or 95 fields of soccer or football. I don't have the exact figure, but some, because of sea level rise. Of course, it's nothing comparable with some countries in the Pacific, for example, or in the Caribbean, but especially in the Pacific, or in South Asia. But because I was 4.5 years at the United Nations, I mean, for me it's still very clear, very vivid, the memory of listening to my colleagues from some of the Pacific countries who are not losing football fields. They are losing like 10% of a country, 20% of an island. You probably know some of the countries of the Pacific are already buying land in places a little bit higher in other countries, or signing agreements, special agreements on migration for their population, preventing the consequences of sea level rise in their country. So it's nothing comparable to that. We are working on mitigation, yes. We are, for example, reviewing our laws regarding how far from the coast you can build, of course, to prevent further consequences from sea level rise. But yes, you should go to Portugal and check this, the way we are doing, and even comment on that, and give us some suggestions. But as I said, you also gave me the opportunity to speak about the connection between ocean and energy. Our coast, in our coast, the ocean is very deep. So we are looking at 3 different ways of getting energy from the ocean. One is offshore wind. It's basically doable, economically viable, and we have already started with some tests, and we are opening now some bids, international bids, to do it in a more intensive way. But we are also looking at the energy from the waves and from the currents. And we have started a project where at the same place in the ocean, same area, we can use at the same time, in the same area, under the water, the wave energy from the waves, and offshore wind on top of the water. Because if you have an offshore wind unit, you cannot do anything underground, or you shouldn't, even fishing, for example. So why not using the same area to do both, and then connect, because they are together, and then connect them together to the grid on the coast.
So optimize the two of them. Okay, so I have another question there, and then we'll have time for 2 more questions.
Thank you for the talk. My name is Markus Vogt. I come from Germany, and I'm here for 2 months scientific research about environmental ethics and Catholic social teaching. From that background, which role plays the Catholic Church in Portugal for sustainability, or does it play a role? Maybe with the background of Laudato Si, the encyclica of Pope Francis, where he has the idea for sustainability, it's not enough to have technological innovation. He says we need also social and cultural innovation regarding our patterns of consumption, about our values, about our idea of welfare, of solidarity. Is that a relevant discussion in Portugal or not?
It is. It certainly is. On the Catholic Church in Portugal, I have to say that I'd never heard anything against this bet, this strategic bet on sustainability. But I noticed that, but I noticed a change in the tone after Laudato Si. That was very clear. I think it was not only clear in Portugal, but everywhere around the world. Yes. But let me touch on the other dimensions of sustainability. And thank you for the question. Yes, that's essential. That's absolutely essential. And when I mention that part of our population right at the beginning was not happy with the bet on sustainable, on renewable energy, I mean, this of course brought to the governments, the successive governments, the need to apply some social rates for the price of electricity, precisely because of that. Because you cannot simply bet on new technologies or in more sustainable ways without being sure that the benefits are felt by everybody. As you certainly know, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, agreed in 2015 by the United Nations, and all the members of the United Nations include precisely this triple dimension of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social. And all the measures I was speaking about that we need to accelerate to one day reach net zero carbon objectives, we'll have to make sure that we do it in a way, or let's put it like that, not in a one-size-fits-all way. Because the countries are very different. The regions in each country are also very different. And the needs for the populations of different regions or for different countries or from different continents are so diverse that we have to adapt the strategies in order to bring everybody along. Because you cannot simply decide that an underdeveloped country will have to start producing all its energy through renewables in 10 years. That's impossible. That's clearly impossible. So what we have to do is the ones that can go faster will go faster, in order to make sure that it will be then easier, also in terms of transfer of technology and development cooperation and more private investment in developing countries, to make sure that then all will reach there, but each one in its own way and each one in its own pace.
Okay, one more question over there. Yeah, please. And then one last question at the end, which is going to be a fast one.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks again, Ambassador, for joining us today. My name is Jason. I'm actually from the law school here. My question is about agriculture. Can you talk a little bit more about the innovation that Portugal is making in agriculture and how that's going?
Yes, I think I will leave our plan because it has several chapters on agriculture and animal production, and I think that the idea is twofold. So on one side, to make sure that progressively the way you farm is more sustainable, but also at the same time you need to compensate by enlarging the areas of forest. And in our case, we have, in percentage terms in Europe, our area of forests is quite big. But there's a question of adequacy. Because at a certain moment, some decades ago, there was a choice of planting trees that were not traditional in those regions of the country to produce wood more quickly, that would be ready to be cut more quickly. But then, as the average temperature was going up, we started to have more and more forest fires. So one of the questions, the big questions, very big questions we have to solve now regarding planting of trees has to do with convincing people and making sure that it is economically viable to plant plants that are more adapted, that are more adequate to the kind of soil in the different regions of Portugal, but that are also more resistant to forest fires.
Okay, so I think I'm going to skip the last question because I want to give some time for the ambassador to enjoy a little bit the reception, and you can join us out there. So let's thank the ambassador again. But before that, we have a little present for the ambassador. So it comes on the Oliveira Lima Library, so I hope bag. So I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much. So I have to say obrigado.
Obrigada.
Because as I said, this is a library that has a lot to do not only with Brazil but also with Portugal. If I can come back quickly to your question, just because it has a Luso-American connection here also. Dealing with forest fires. We also have, because of course it is not only affecting Portugal, it's affecting other countries and regions in the world. We signed an agreement with California because the challenges regarding forest fires and the kind of soil in California are very close to ours. So very recently we signed an agreement with them to exchange notes and research on that. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador.